Right, I'm going to be talking about universal basic income and why it's efficient as well as how to pay for it. It's the best idea that neoliberalism has ever created. In chapter 12 in Capitalism and Freedom, which is about alleviating poverty, Milton Friedman argues that private charity is limited and that people don't feel like there's a need to contribute if nobody else is going to contribute. He says, we might not be willing to contribute the same amount without such assurance. In small communities, public pressure can suffice to realise a provision even in private charity, but in large impersonal communities, that are increasingly dominant, it's much more difficult to do so. And the problem is with government programs is that these programs only benefit certain groups of people like unions, farmers, minimum wage workers, who tend to have a lot of power in politics. So his solution is to implement a negative income tax, which is the original universal basic income. The rules as described here are simple. Everyone has a $600 individual tax threshold where they do not get taxed if they earn anything equal to or below that amount of money. As this is written in 1963, $600 is actually $5,500 today per year. So if an individual earns less than their tax threshold, they receive that difference, which is multiplied by a subsidy rate, like 50%. If somebody earns $300, the difference between $600 and $300 is $300. And with a subsidy rate of 50%, that would be $150. So in total, the person will receive, the total people will have $450 in total. Here's a graph illustrating what people's incomes will look like after negative income tax. As we can see, as people have more income that they earn through employment, they still have more income at the end of the day, but it's just that the gradient at which they earn more money decreases as the poorer people are, the more negative income tax they get, but at the end of the day, they still have more money if they earn more money. Unlike welfare, where people earning more money get penalized for earning more money, so they end up being, well, the same or if not worse off with welfare. So the key strengths, as argued by Friedman, is that there is an incentive to do better in society, and also there's much lower administrative costs. And we'll get to that. So Milton Friedman's best argument is written in this paragraph, which brilliantly defines why UBI is so efficient and why government spending is so inefficient. He says, in 1961, of course, there's 57 million consumer units, and there is a total of 33 billion, which is 300 billion nowadays, that is spent on welfare, amounting to federal, state, and local spending. If all of that money was spent on the lowest 10% of people, each consumer unit would receive £52,000 in today's money, dollars. And even if that money was divided amongst the lowest 20%, that would be $28,000 per consumer unit, which is absolutely insane. And in 1961, did the average poor person receive $28,000? No, of course not, because government is so inefficient. If you look at UK social spending today, the economy is basically a mess. The economy is stagnating, and it's horrible. $300 billion is spent every year by the government on social protection. If there's 60 million people in the country, then that means every person should have £5,000 on average. And even if a third is spent on pensions, which, fine, there should still be £3,000 spent per person. But do I receive £3,300 a person? Do my friends receive that kind of money? No, they don't. No one does. And so the universal basic credit system and the benefit system that existed beforehand, it's broken. The money doesn't go to the people. And GDP growth is pathetic. It barely reaches 2% a year. 22% of people are in poverty, in which poverty is defined as being having 50% or less than the median household income. And if we assume that most people in poverty earn between 20 and 30k in median household income, if there were two consumer units who earned £5,000 a year, then they would be earning about 32,000 a year in household income, which is over 50% of their median household income, which means that they would be pushed out of poverty, and yeah, the poverty rate would decrease to like 5%. How many minutes do I have? So if you look at Andrew Yang was the person who really brought this idea back to light in 2020. His presidential bid was based on the Freedom Dividend that was based on $1,000 a month for every American citizen, no string attached. Not only was he using a solution, but he was also using automation as a problem, in that there would be a problem and a solution, although the problem has nothing to do with the solution. But the problem is with automation is that since 2000, productivity has stagnated, and productivity is output over working labor input. And so automation won't be coming to take your jobs because productivity has stagnated since 2000. I've read his book, it's great, it's fun to read, but it makes a lot of assumptions. His website boasts about 150 different policies. However, the fact that he only got 5% of the primary vote, it only goes to show that his 150 policies only diluted his significant ideas, and he made himself less interesting because of all of these boring policies. Let's take what it says on the website. Medicare for all. Well, Bernie Sanders has that idea. Legalizing weed. Bernie Sanders again. Gun safety. That's been discussed for 4 decades already. No one cares. Women's right to choose. That is a very old idea. And fighting climate change. That's a boring idea that Bernie Sanders proposes. Now, if we look at how do we pay for it, Andrew Yang makes a really bad argument as to how to pay for universal basic income. Let's look here. Yeah, so the problem is here is that what Andrew Yang is doing is that he proposes a 10% value-added tax, which only raises $0.8 trillion to pay for a $2.4 trillion policy, which is a third. And so Andrew Yang makes a weak argument because he doesn't actually describe how to pay for it. And it's not that he's supposed to give a list of all of the taxes that must be implemented, but he could also argue that the deficit doesn't matter. But he doesn't do that. And the idea that the selling data and robot trucks is going to pay for it, it's just a bad argument. Now, he does list very good socioeconomic benefits, and he is right in doing that, but he just doesn't know how to pay for it. Now, I propose that the deficit does not matter, because if the GDP growth increases, then it's okay if the deficit increases, because it's not about the debt per se, but it's about the debt to GDP ratio. The Roosevelt Institute proposes that GDP growth could increase by another 1.5% if you take the 12% increase over 8 years and divide it by 8. This means that, yes, the deficit could increase substantially, but given that GDP growth increases by 75%, the deficit could also increase by 75%. And we could also cut back on the military and wasteful program. The Roosevelt Institute did a big macroeconomic study on this. And also, the national debt can be expanded because the only consequence of the debt is the interest on the debt. Because banks and people hold on to bonds as an asset, and on the whole, the national debt doesn't actually have to be paid off. We only have to pay back the interest on the debt. If you look at something like your student loans, The student loans doesn't have to be paid back. All you have to do is pay back the interest. And the only reason why people say they want to pay off the student debt, the student loans, it's only because they can stop paying that interest. But even then, the only consequence is the interest. Now you may be wondering, well, the only reason why the interest on the government debt is so low is because of artificially low interest rates. And artificially low interest rates is bad because it can accelerate boom-bust cycles. And while I agree with this, I believe that there's many different options in reducing boom-bust cycles and the over-speculated economy that we have today. For example, credit expansion could be banned and we could just have a government responsible for printing the money, or we can ban fractional reserve banking and that there's less assets and liabilities in our economy. There's many different ideas to mitigate boom-bust cycles, even with artificially low interest rates. And keep in mind, artificially low interest rates is an idea that comes from the Austrian School of Economic Thought. And thank you for watching. If you like my presentation, I don't know, subscribe. And praise the market. Bye-bye.